He believed his conflict had concluded. Following his return from active duty, 33-year-old former serviceman Eli Mercer attempted to conceal his history in the tranquility of the Oregon woodlands with only his retired K-9 associate, Shadow, for companionship. However, when Shadow abruptly dashed into the forest one morning, his gaze fixed, his heart racing, Eli pursued, unwittingly stepping into a puzzle he was ill-equipped to unravel: a concealed dwelling, a mute child, and revelations that could alter everything he presumed to understand about allegiance, bereavement, and a final duty. What they uncover within will render you without words. If you have ever held faith in the indissoluble connection between a human and a canine, or in the type of conclusion that evokes tears, smiles, and a renewed sense of vitality, then remain with us. This narrative is for you. Eli Mercer never aspired to be anyone's champion again, not after the events overseas, not after Logan. His diminutive cabin, situated deep within Oregon's pine-laden wilderness, was intended as a final resting place for the individual he once was. Out here, no one posed inquiries, no one anticipated anything. Just him, a stove that functioned poorly, a bed that never felt sufficiently warm, and Shadow, the sole being who still regarded him as if he hadn't disintegrated. Shadow was more than a mere canine. He was Eli's vital link, the last filament connecting him to a life that felt more like a film reel singed at its periphery. A black and tan German shepherd with eyes that had witnessed too much, ears that twitched at the sound of every snapped twig, muscles that rippled with recollections of war zones they both wished to forget. The dog had saved Eli's life more times than he could enumerate. Yet, these days, he was more companion than guardian, more memory than mission. Until that particular morning. It commenced like any other, a quiet cup of black coffee, Eli's boots still caked with mud from the previous day's trek, and Shadow curled beside the hearth. But something shifted. One moment the dog was reposing, the next, he was erect, alert, rigid, ears pricked forward as if he had detected something Eli could not. No bark, no whimper, just unadulterated, focused instinct. Then he fled. Shadow! Shadow! Wait! Eli exclaimed, seizing his jacket as panic constricted his chest. Shadow had never run in that manner before, not in the year they had resided out here, not once. Eli sprinted after him, his heart pounding, his lungs struggling against the icy morning air. The forest rapidly enveloped them. Ancient pines loomed overhead like sentinels, the ground thick with moss and old regrets. The deeper they ventured, the more the world transformed, quieter, heavier, as if something unseen observed them. It wasn't solely the physical pursuit, it was what pursued him internally as well. Every branch that struck his face, every root that threatened to trip him, conjured flashes from the past. A Humvee torn asunder, a radio communication that went unanswered, a best friend's scream abruptly silenced. Why was Shadow running now? Towards what? Then he saw it. His dog paused at the brink of a precipitous incline, his tail raised like a banner. Beyond him, through the trees, something stirred, not wildlife, not the wind, something deliberate. Eli caught up, his breath ragged, hands on his knees. But before he could articulate anything, before he could even curse, Shadow growled, a low warning not directed at Eli, but towards the forest. The air felt wrong. And Eli, a trained soldier, a broken man, suddenly felt as if the mission had never truly concluded, it had merely altered its form. And deep within, something informed him they were no longer alone. What lurked in those trees? Why was Shadow leading him here? And most crucially, had someone been awaiting them all along? Eli remained motionless for a moment too long, his chest heaving, every survival instinct murmuring, retreat. Yet Shadow did not recoil. His tail was steady, his eyes narrowed, his posture as rigid as a statue sculpted by conflict. Whatever lay out there, whatever had drawn him this far into the woods, it was not yet concluded. And Eli knew one truth above all: when Shadow moved in this manner, it signified something. It always had. Branches snagged at his jacket as they pressed further into the timberline. The forest grew denser with each step, becoming colder, quieter, too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small creatures, only the soft padding of Shadow's paws and the thud of Eli's boots behind him. The tension hung like mist, and every creak of a branch sounded like a whisper from the past. Then he noticed them, footprints, small, human, not eroded by time or weather, recent, child-sized. A chill ran up Eli's spine. Out here, in this remote expanse of desolation. He crouched beside them, touching the indentations with fingers that still bore the phantom sensation of rifle recoil. No shoes, just bare prints in the dirt. And next to them, lighter paw marks, not Shadow's, something smaller. He stood slowly, his heart hammering in his ribs. Shadow hadn't stopped. The dog was moving with purpose, as if he were following something Eli couldn't perceive. Not chasing, tracking. A flicker of memory struck him hard. A different jungle, different sounds, the scent of smoke and sweat thick in the air. A village raid, screams, and Logan, his best friend, shouting over the radio, "Find the girl, Mercer. She's just a kid." Eli blinked hard. That was years ago, thousands of miles away. Why was it flooding back now? The forest opened abruptly without warning, revealing a clearing he didn't recall from any of his hikes. And there, situated like a forgotten secret, was a cabin. Not one of those inviting Airbnb types. This one was weathered, skeletal, barely standing, shingles missing, vines constricting its edges. But someone had been here recently, fresh firewood stacked by the porch, smoke scars around a blackened pit out front. Shadow slowed, his ears flicking. He sniffed towards the door, then stepped aside as if making room for Eli. A strange silence descended again, not empty, expectant. Eli stepped onto the porch, and that's when he saw it taped to the cabin door with yellowing duct tape, a drawing done in shaky crayon, almost like a message, a German shepherd, unmistakably Shadow, drawn beside a man in uniform. Next to it, a stick-figure girl with a red X scratched over her mouth. Eli's pulse stopped. He stared at the image, his heart crashing inside his chest. Someone knew Shadow. Someone in this cabin knew him. Suddenly, this wasn't just a mystery, it was personal. As he reached for the handle, a question burned behind his ribs. Was this cabin a trap or a cry for help? What awaited behind the door could rewrite everything Eli thought he had buried. And Shadow, he wasn't leading him back to the past, he was dragging him towards the truth. The door creaked open as if it hadn't shifted in years. The atmosphere inside was dense, stale wood, cold cinders, and something else Eli couldn't identify. Yet there was warmth too, not merely physical, but emotional, familiar, as if something within this dilapidated structure remembered him even if he couldn't quite recall it. He entered slowly, with Shadow close at his heels, one paw at a time, tail low, eyes scrutinizing every corner like a soldier still on duty. Instincts, they never truly faded. The cabin appeared to have been constructed to forget the outside world, a stone hearth in the center, soot-blackened and unused, dust-laden furniture that held narratives in its tiers, cans of provisions lining the shelves, beans, soups, tuna, all hand-labeled in a child's script. In the corner, a small table was set with a chipped mug, a crumpled blanket, and a lantern flickering on its last remnants of fuel. Someone had been here recently, alone. Then a sound, bare feet on creaking floorboards. Eli froze. Shadow didn't growl, didn't bark, he simply stepped forward, calm but alert. Eli followed his gaze. From behind a crooked door frame emerged a figure no larger than the rifle Eli once carried in Afghanistan, a girl, pale, thin, her eyes wide as if they had witnessed every conceivable nightmare. She couldn't have been older than 9. But what struck harder than her fragile frame or sunken cheeks was her silence. She didn't scream, didn't run. She just stared at Shadow as if she were seeing a ghost. Then, slowly, she moved forward and hugged him. Eli stood dumbfounded, unable to speak. The girl pressed her face into the dog's neck and began to shake. Not from cold, but from release, as if she had suppressed something for too long. Shadow didn't move. He stood still, calm, patient. His tail gave one soft wag, the kind of movement that conveys, "It's okay now. You're safe." Eli stepped closer, gently crouching to meet her eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. Nothing, no words, just a glance, a twitch of the lip, and then she pointed to a dusty wall covered in hand-drawn pictures. One of them had her name scribbled in crayon. "Lena." He looked back at her and whispered, "Lena, I'm Eli." He didn't expect a response, but she gave one, barely above a whisper, like the wind brushing against old glass. "Shadow?" she said, her voice cracking like dry leaves. Eli's throat clenched. You know Shadow?" he asked, stunned. Lena nodded, then turned and pointed to an old photo pinned beside the drawings. It was sun-faded, but the faces were clear. A younger Eli, a laughing Logan Kane, and a baby in his arms, Lena. Eli staggered back a step. "Logan," he whispered. Memories came crashing. Logan showing him that same photo back in base camp. "That's my girl," he'd said. "Haven't met her yet, but she's mine." He carried that photo like it was armor, swore he'd get back to her. He never did. Eli's stomach twisted. The guilt, the memories, the silence he'd buried himself in. And now here she was, his best friend's daughter, alone in the woods, hugging the one dog who'd saved them both more than once. This wasn't just strange. It was impossible. It was fate, sharp-edged and full of ghosts. But why was Lena here? Who brought her? Who left her? And what secrets were these walls still hiding? Whatever this was, Eli knew one thing. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was part of this now, whether he wanted to be or not. And Shadow, he wasn't just a guide. He was the bridge between past and purpose. What comes next would change everything. Eli did not slumber that night. Not because the wind howled externally or because the forest creaked as if holding its breath. No, what kept him conscious was the presence of a phantom seated beside him. Logan Kane, his comrade in arms, his closest friend, deceased, interred, yet somehow still animate in the traces of the little girl curled beside Shadow on a dusty mattress. The daughter Logan never had the chance to meet, the daughter now under Eli's guardianship. The moment replayed in Eli's thoughts like a recurring war film. Lena breaking her silence to murmur Shadow's name, the drawing of Shadow and Logan affixed to the door, and that faded photograph, evidence that this was not mere chance. This was destiny. Brutal, intentional, and imbued with sorrow. Eli quietly searched the cabin after Lena had fallen asleep, seeking answers as he once scanned battlefields for improvised explosive devices. He wasn't equipped for this type of conflict. Fatherhood, protectorship, emotional hazards wrapped in crayons and plush toys. Yet he could not abandon the situation now, not when Logan had evidently trusted him enough to preserve his legacy. He discovered a crate concealed beneath a pile of worn blankets, partially covered in dust. Inside were tattered notebooks, drawings, and something that made his breath catch. A military dog tag Logan's, the name still decipherable despite years of wear. Kane, LM, blood type, rank, unit number, the one they both served in. And beneath it, a journal, coverless, its pages yellowed and curled. The handwriting was undeniably Logan's. Eli recognized it from years of hastily scribbled battle plans and notes during deployment. The entries were disjointed, chaotic, as if penned during moments of panic and urgency, and every page sketched the outline of a narrative darker than Eli had conceived. Logan had uncovered something overseas, something corrupt. He mentioned names, coordinates, movements of a private military contractor that had gone rogue. He attempted to report it through official channels. Silence, then threats, then orders to withdraw and leave the truth buried. And somewhere along the way, Lena became a target. One page tore Eli apart, they know about her. I need to disappear. If this letter ever reaches you, Mercer, it means they got me. Don't trust anyone and keep her safe. Shadow knows the way. Shadow knows the way. Eli looked over at the dog, who slept lightly beside Lena like a sentinel, not merely protecting, guiding. It wasn't instinct that had brought them here, it was Logan, a final directive, a silent entreaty. And Eli had complied without even realizing it. But here's the twist. Eli realized he wasn't just haunted by the past anymore, he was standing in it, breathing it, and it was alive, dangerous, and unfinished. That realization cracked something open in him. All this time, he thought his trauma made him unworthy of connection, that he was too broken to protect anyone again. But Lena didn't need perfect, she needed him, broken and all. Because maybe, just maybe, that's what resilience really looks like, showing up when you're shattered. And the pieces were finally starting to fit. But the danger, it wasn't over. If Logan was right and Lena was still being hunted, this cabin wasn't a refuge, it was a trap waiting to spring. The next question wasn't why she was here, it was who else knew and how long until they came knocking. Because sometimes ghosts don't just haunt, they come back armed. And this time, Eli wasn't walking away, not from Lena, not from Shadow, not from the truth. By morning, the forest was not the only thing that felt altered, Eli was changing too. Something about that journal, about Lena's quiet fortitude, about the way Shadow hadn't departed from her side all night, it stirred something concealed beneath the trauma, a part of him that recalled what it felt like to be significant. Yet clarity carries a cost, and Eli was about to discover that tranquility in a cabin this isolated was invariably fleeting. The initial forewarning arrived when Shadow growled, not a snarl, not a bark, just that deep, low vibration in his throat, the kind that used to send soldiers scrambling for concealment. Shadow stood at the cabin window, his body rigid, his nose twitching. And that was when Eli observed it, a faint glint, metal flashing briefly in the tree lean, vanishing as swiftly as it appeared. It could have been sunlight, it could have been a lens, it could have been someone watching. Eli didn't hesitate. He snapped into old instincts like muscle memory. His hands moved fast but silent, checking the perimeter, counting exits, calculating defense as if it were second nature. He glanced at Lena. She was awake now, eyes wide, sensing something was amiss. Her hand clutched a torn teddy bear as if it were a grenade. No words, just fear, silent and pure. He crouched beside her. "Listen to me," he whispered, trying to steady his voice. "I need you to be brave, okay? Like your dad was." Her eyes shimmered with something that almost looked like belief. He gently moved her to the hidden crawl space under the floorboards and whispered, "Stay here. No matter what you hear, Shadow will protect you." The dog didn't even look back. He slid in beside her, eyes locked on the door, body poised to leap. Eli armed himself with the only thing he had, a rusted hunting knife and the sharpness of a man who had already lost everything once. He stepped outside into the cold and the silence was immediate. No birds, no wind, just that eerie, almost staged quiet as if nature had stepped aside to let danger pass through. That's when he saw them, footprints, fresh, not Lena's, larger, heavily treaded. And they weren't alone, multiple sets, at least 3. And then voices, low, muffled, not close, but closing in. One voice broke through the haze, male, firm, "Sweep the cabin. She has to be here." That mutt was trained to return. Return. Eli's gut twisted. These weren't forest rangers or curious hikers, these were men sent with purpose. They knew Shadow. They knew Lena. And they knew this cabin. The dots connected like falling dominoes. Logan hadn't just stumbled onto corruption, he exposed something bigger, something that needed covering up. And Lena, she wasn't just an orphan, she was a loose thread they wanted cut. Eli gripped the knife tighter. He had fought in deserts and jungles. He had buried brothers and survived what should have killed him a dozen times. But nothing, not even war, felt as urgent as protecting what Logan had left behind. He turned back towards the cabin and whispered to himself, if they're coming, they're not leaving with her. And just like that, the hunted became the trapper. The cabin wasn't just a hiding spot anymore, it was a battlefield waiting to happen. Because Eli Mercer wasn't running this time. He was finally home. And home fights back. Eli had consistently believed the most frightening things in life were uniforms, carried weaponry, or arrived in the guise of official correspondence stamped with government insignia. Yet, as the sun descended behind the trees and twilight consumed the light, he comprehended something more unsettling. Secrets were far more lethal than adversaries, and this cabin was replete with them. Inside, Lena remained concealed in the crawl space with Shadow beside her, both unmoving, their gazes fixed on the floorboards above. Eli had fortified the door, attached fishing line to old tin cans outside, and strategically positioned noise traps around the porch as if he were in Kandahar once more. Yet, even that was not what kept him on edge. It was what he had just unearthed. While shifting a creaky dresser to obstruct the rear entrance, the floor groaned beneath it and then yielded. Beneath a decayed panel hidden under old newspapers and moldy towels was a concealed compartment. Inside, a sealed envelope, a diminutive military-grade USB drive, and a single line hastily written across a folded piece of duct tape, for AMM. Only his hands quivered. That was him, Eli Mercer. He unfolded the note first. Logan's script, sharp, hurried, yet unmistakable. He could hear his voice as he read, "If you're reading this, they didn't get me. But they're close. And if Lena's with you, they'll come for her next." This drive contains everything, names, documents, surveillance, proof of what they did. "They sold us out, Eli. We were pawns and I couldn't let them get to her." Eli sat down heavily, the gravity of the words constricting every breath in his chest. He knew there were rumors, whispers, intents, and behind armored doors, contractors enriching themselves from bloodshed, commanders averting their gaze. But this was a confession, a revelation, and a death sentence if it fell into the wrong hands. He retrieved his old laptop from his gear bag. It was a marvel it still functioned. He inserted the USB, his heart pounding like a war drum. What appeared was a folder labeled Wolf's Gate. Inside, dossiers, maps, flight logs, emails, names he recognized from the unit, men who were lauded in the press and now revealed to be selling coordinates to the enemy. Betrayal didn't even begin to describe it. This was treason that had cost good men, Logan, their lives. Suddenly, the larger picture materialized. Lena wasn't just a target because of what she knew, she was leverage, insurance, the one loose end Logan's enemies couldn't control. And Shadow, the dog, was never merely a companion. Logan had trained him with a purpose, to return to Eli and to lead him here when the time was right. Outside, the wind shifted, hands rattled. Eli grabbed the laptop, backed everything up onto a spare drive, and shoved both into his coat. If anything happened to him, this evidence had to survive. It was bigger than justice. It was redemption for Logan, for Lena, for all the ghosts Eli carried with him in silence. He returned to the crawl space and knelt beside Lena. She clutched the bear tighter but didn't flinch. "Your dad was a good man," he said softly. "And he trusted me to keep you safe. That's what I'm going to do." For the first time, she reached out, her small hand trembling, landing on Eli's. No words, just that look in her eyes, not fear, trust. Shadow leaned against them, a silent wall of loyalty. Three souls, all broken in their own ways, tied together by a man who died trying to save something worth living for. And outside, the forest wasn't quiet anymore. Boots in the distance, voices closer now. Danger knocking at the door. But inside that cabin, a soldier was ready. A little girl wasn't hiding. She was surviving. And a dog was about to become legend. Because the next time that door opens, someone's not walking back out. The initial crunch of a boot against gravel reverberated more loudly than any firearm discharge. Eli did not flinch. He was kneeling near the window, one hand gripping the hilt of the old hunting knife, the other resting on the warm wood floor as if it were hallowed ground. Every nerve in his body was taut, every breath measured. This was not fear. It was concentration. They were present. Three silhouettes navigated the twilight, armed, deliberate, silent as phantoms. The kind of men who did not pose inquiries first. Contractors, perhaps. Mercenaries. Their faces were partially obscured by tactical gear, but Eli did not need to discern their expressions. He had worn the same guise once, the type of countenance one adopts when believing oneself to be the predator. Yet tonight, they were not pursuing a girl. They were entering a war veteran's ultimate line of defense. Inside, Lena remained quiet in the crawl space. Not a whimper, not a shift, just trust. And beside her, Shadow. Tail still, muscles tensed. That dog had witnessed combat, fire, smoke, blood. And now he was prepared to defend one more life, perhaps the most crucial one yet. Eli stayed low, observing through a cracked panel. The men approached the front door, whispering in clipped tones. One of them raised a boot, ready to kick it in. A significant miscalculation. Eli had rigged the frame with old nails and shattered glass tied to wire. The second the door burst, a cloud of dust and debris exploded into the first man's face. He screamed, dropping his rifle as his eye caught a splinter of glass. The others stumbled back, but Eli was already moving. Like a phantom, he slipped out the back, looped around, and struck fast. The second man barely had time to turn before Eli tackled him to the ground, driving the hilt of his knife into the man's vest to knock the wind out of him. Brutal, controlled, silent. But the third wasn't playing defense. He slipped around the side of the cabin, and that's when Shadow pounced. The sound that erupted was animalistic, a snarl torn from a place beyond instinct. Shadow lunged, knocking the man to the ground, jaws snapping inches from the mercenary's throat. The man screamed and fired once wildly. The bullet missed, burying itself in the roof beam. Eli came around just in time to see Shadow clamp down on the man's arm, twisting hard enough to send the weapon flying into the bushes. With a final shove, Eli knocked the attacker unconscious with the butt of a fallen rifle. Silence. Eli stood there panting, blood pounding in his ears. Not Shadow's. Just the weight of adrenaline starting to crash. They were still alive. They'd won, for now. He turned to the cabin, his heart in his throat. "Lena," he called. The floorboards creaked slowly, gently. The hatch opened. And there she was, small, trembling, wide-eyed, but unbroken. Shadow ran to her first, pressing his muzzle against her hands. She clutched his fur like it was oxygen. Eli dropped to his knees. She rushed into his arms without hesitation, burying her face in his chest. And for the first time in a long time, Eli felt like a man again. Not a ghost, not a shell, but someone worthy of being trusted. Outside, the forest exhaled. The storm had passed, but Eli knew this wasn't the end. It was just the first battle. He stood and looked at the unconscious men. "You chose the wrong cabin," he muttered. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. The people behind these men, they didn't quit. So Eli did the only thing a soldier could do. He prepared. Because now it wasn't just about survival, it was about justice. It was about legacy. And above all, it was about Lena. The cabin was now quiet, not the silence that follows violence, but the kind that feels merited, as if the forest itself had paused to recognize what had just transpired. Eli sat on the porch, Lena beside him, enveloped in a worn wool blanket, her head resting gently on his arm. Shadow lay at their feet, his eyes still open, his ears twitching with every gust of wind. He wasn't sleeping, he was guarding. There was peace, but it was tinged with awareness, as if everyone, man, child, and dog, understood this was not the conclusion, only the calm within the storm. Eli glanced down at the USB drive in his pocket. The truth, the evidence, the final message from a man he once called brother. Logan hadn't merely requested protection. He had given Eli purpose again, a chance to undo the silence he had been entombed in since returning home. With morning light filtering through the treetops, Eli made a decision. He could not flee any longer. He would not. Not with Lena looking up at him as if he were someone who could mend things, as if he were someone deserving of trust. It's peculiar how one small hand in yours can obliterate 1,000 sleepless nights. He contacted an old friend, someone from his unit who had left the military prematurely, someone Eli knew still possessed integrity. Within hours, a helicopter buzzed low through the trees and landed a few miles from the cabin. 2 federal agents disembarked, authentic ones, their credentials verified through contacts Eli still had concealed in burner phones and encrypted messaging applications he hadn't accessed in years. Paranoia, it appeared, had its advantages. Eli handed over the USB drive, the backup, and Logan's journal. Names, proof, all of it. "You take this," he said. "You run it up every chain until someone bleeds." One of the agents, a woman with sharp eyes and a steely gaze, nodded slowly. "You realize this brings a lot of heat down on you, right?" Eli gave a half smile. "It already did, and I'm still standing." They took the evidence, promised protection, promised justice. But Eli had heard promises before. He didn't care about headlines or takedowns. All he cared about was sitting back down on that porch, pulling Lena close, and feeling her small hand wrap around his finger like an anchor. And that's when it happened. Lena looked up at him, her voice still fragile, but steadier than before. "Did you really know my dad?" Eli nodded. "I did. He was brave. He was funny. He had this stupid way of trying to fix every broken thing, even when he was the one who needed fixing most." She smiled, just slightly. "Sounds like you." Those words hit like a bullet, but not the kind that wounds, the kind that heals. Later that week, under the soft sunlight by a quiet lakeside they now called home, Eli signed the guardianship papers. Lena was his now, not out of duty, but out of love, the kind that grows in the cracks of grief, watered by loyalty, by promises kept, and by second chances you never thought you deserved. Shadow, now old but undefeated, sat nearby, chewing on a stick like a puppy again. Every once in a while, he'd glance over at Lena and wag his tail. Just once. It was all he needed to say, "She's safe now." And Eli, he finally slept. No nightmares, no ghosts, just the soft rhythm of a child's breathing down the hall, and the quiet hum of a forest that had seen too much but now guarded something sacred. Because sometimes the war doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. It ends when you find something to live for again. And in the end, Logan's last command wasn't about vengeance. It was about redemption. He didn't just send Eli to rescue a girl. He sent him to be rescued, too.